Hello, welcome to Elizabeth Reads. Today we have the second half of the 39 steps. Despite my efforts, the precise meaning of some of Scudder's notes remained obscure, such as a dozen odd references to 39 steps. Their last mention was followed by the phrase, I counted them, high tides, 10:17 p.m. I could only hope they weren't important. Whatever the significance of these cryptic passages, the basic knowledge I had in my possession was explosive enough to be taken seriously. Somehow, I had to alert the authorities. At that moment, I heard the sound of a motor car approaching. I went to the window and saw a big touring car pull up a few hundred yards away. Two men got out and walked towards the inn. One was squat and muscular. The other bore a worrying resemblance to the tall man who had witnessed my departure from Portland Place. I crept along the corridor to the hallway. From there I could hear what was said in the lobby without being seen. Momentarily, I heard the front door open and the two men enter. They were greeted by the innkeeper, to whom they proceeded to give an all too accurate description of myself. I didn't wait to hear any more. I scuttled back to my room, opened the window, and scrambled outside. Keeping low, I ran past the inn and along the road to the men's car. I started it and, sending up a shower of gravel, raced away from the inn as fast as I could. Chapter 5, Attack from Above. Any doubts I might have had as to whether the Black Stone were onto me vanished in an instant. I drove the 40-horsepower tourer across the moor roads for all she was worth. I could only hope that, having deprived my enemies of their vehicle, I could put a fair distance between them and myself. After half an hour or so, I dared to hope that I'd shaken off my pursuers. And then, glancing behind me, I saw something that set my pulse racing. Far in the distance, a monoplane flew low over the hilltops. For a moment, this sinister craft circled as if getting its bearings, and then, with a burst of speed, it headed straight in my direction. If my stalkers had taken to the air, then my chances of evading them were dramatically reduced. On the bare moor, I was at their mercy. My only chance was to get to the leafy cover of the valley. I hurtled down the hillside like lightning. The bumpy roads were better designed for sheep than motor cars, and it felt as if my bones might rattle clean through my skin. I had no choice but to go on, looking back whatever I dared, only to see the plane getting closer and closer. Soon I was on a road between hedges. The noise of the aircraft seemed fainter behind me now, and I let my concentration slip for a second. At that moment, I caught sight of the nose of another vehicle emerging at 90 degrees from a driveway ahead of me. The road was too narrow to steer around the other car, so I did the only thing possible. I crashed into the hedge on the other side of the road. As hawthorn branches scratched at my face, I sensed the ground beneath the car give way. To my horror, I realized the hedge bordered a sheer drop to a river some 30 feet or more below. I felt the car buck and pitch, and then something hit me full on the head. I had a vague sense of an almighty smash, and then nothing. Chapter 6, Manhunt. "Steady there, old chap," came a warm, friendly voice. As I blinked back into consciousness, the figure of a tall young man in tweeds formed before me. He pressed a glass into my hand, and I gulped down the contents gratefully. I found myself lying on a sofa in what seemed to be some grand manor house. "I must apologize for pulling out in front of you like that," he said. "Bad show." No, it was my fault," I rambled. "You're not hurt, mister?" "Bullivant, Sir Harry Bullivant. No, not a scratch, dear boy, which is more than can be said for your motor car, I'm afraid." "It seems I have you to thank for my lucky escape," I said, rubbing my sore head. "Thank that hawthorn branch, old man," he said with a chuckle. "Hooked you like a jolly old salmon and left you dangling. I just reeled you in, so to speak." Over dinner, I engaged in the most pleasant conversation with my new friend without giving away too much about myself. It emerged that Sir Harry was the Liberal candidate for the nearby town of Brattleburn. As we finished dinner, he told me that politics ran in his family, as his uncle was the permanent secretary at the Foreign Office. This news forced me to reconsider my secrecy. Here was someone with a link to the authorities. Today was the 13th. If Scudder was right, the attempt on the Karolides' life would be made the day after tomorrow. I had to take the chance. "Listen here, old man," I said. "I've something of a confession to make." I proceeded to tell him the entire story. He listened patiently, and when I'd finished, he sat thoughtfully for a minute. "I may be a bit of a chump as a politician, but I can size a chap up," he said at last. "You're no murderer, and I believe you're speaking the truth. Now, what can I do to help?" We arranged a plan. He would telephone his uncle, Sir Walter, telling him to expect me at his country home in Wiltshire, where I would deliver Scudder's information in person. Harry offered me the use of his car, but I decided I would be less conspicuous journeying on foot cross-country. After a night's rest, a change of clothes, and a hearty breakfast, I took my leave of my new ally and headed south towards the nearest railway station at Moffat. But I had only been walking for half an hour when I became aware that I was not the only soul in the tangle of glens that morning. Just over a ridge in the far distance, I could make out the heads of a string of men. It was the police, assisted by shepherds or gamekeepers by the looks of them. They hallooed at the sight of me, and I could tell by their sudden excitement that Richard Hannay was their quarry, rather than some unfortunate fowl. I ran for what felt like several miles. Breathlessly, I breasted the top of a ridge and suddenly found myself in the grounds of a whitewashed house. My pursuers had left me no room to retreat. I had no choice. I'd have to take my chances inside the building. I sprinted across the lawn and walked through a pair of French windows into a small study. There, seated at a desk, was an elderly, bald-headed gentleman. He didn't move, but simply stared at me with raised eyebrows. "You seem in a hurry, my friend," he said calmly. Unable to catch my breath, I nodded towards the window at the line of approaching men. "Fugitive from justice, eh?" he said. "Well, we can discuss it at length later. In the meantime, I've no desire to have clumsy rural policemen disturbing my peace." With that, he ushered me down a hallway and into a tiny cupboard-like room. "You'll be safe enough here," he said, before closing the door behind him with a click. Hardly able to believe my luck at the gentleman's kindness, I crouched in the darkness. As the minutes passed, I could make out neither the sound of my protector nor my pursuers. And then suddenly the door opened and the old man reappeared. "They've gone," he assured me, but my relief was cut short by his very next words. "This is a lucky morning for you, Mr. Richard Hannay." Before I had time to take this in, the old man raised a revolver to my head. A glance at the man's right hand confirmed what I should have realized the moment I set foot in the house. I was face to face with the leader of the Black Stone. Chapter 7. The Lair of the Black Stone. "Let us not waste time with formalities," said my captor, extending that telltale hand. "The notebook, if you please." "What notebook?" I replied flatly. "Come now, Mr. Hannay," he said with a cruel smile. "We've both come too far to play games." As if to emphasize this point, he inched his revolver closer to my head. "Who is this Hannay, governor?" I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Ned Ainsley's my name, and so help me, I wish I'd never gone and pinched that cursed motor car." For a second, I saw the villain's eyes flicker with doubt. He gestured with the gun for me to leave the room. Keeping me covered all the while, he frog-marched me back into the study. Then he rang a small bell, and 2 men entered. I recognized them at once as the sinister characters from the inn. "Well, Franz?" asked the bald man. "That's him," said the taller of the new arrivals. "Relieve Mr. Hannay of the contents of his pockets, Carl," ordered his boss. The squat fellow grabbed me roughly and disgorged what little I had onto the table. To my surprise, I realized the notebook was missing. The bald man's voice took on an impatient tone. "Where is it?" he rasped threateningly. "Already told you, governor," I began. "Lock him up," barked the chief to his lackeys. "We'll see if a spell without food and water loosens his tongue." I found myself being manhandled across a courtyard and into a damp, pitch-black storeroom attached to the main house. As my jailers turned the key in the lock, I tried to make out anything that might aid my escape. After groping around various crates and sacks of grain, I found a cupboard. It was locked, but I managed to force it open. On the shelf in front of me were a box of matches and several electric lamps. Taking one, I examined the rest of the contents. There was a carton of detonators, cord for fuses, and a dozen little bricks. Crumbling one in my hand, I recognized it at once as lentonite. I hadn't been a mining engineer for nothing. With just one of these bricks, I could blow the house to smithereens. I picked up a detonator and attached it to a couple feet of fuse. And then I put the detonator in a quarter of a lentonite brick and buried it under a sack near the door. Crouching as far away as possible, I lit the fuse and waited. I only hoped that I would survive the next few moments intact. Suddenly, a wave of heat surged from the floor, and then the wall opposite flashed golden yellow and dissolved with a thunderous roar that hammered my brain into a pulp. At first, I felt myself being choked by thick yellow fumes, but then fresh air wafted in from a ragged rent in the wall. Clambering over the debris, I stepped through the hole and out into the yard. I could hear confused cries coming from the house. Running blindly through the smoke, I managed to find my way to the fringe of trees that surrounded the building. Then I kept running until I had put a good 2 miles between myself and the villain's lair. Chapter 8, Assassination. After an hour or so tramping across country, I finally reached the town of Moffat. As I approached the station, my heart was lifted by the sight of young Harry Bullivant. "Thank heavens!" he cried. "I thought I might have missed you. I say, you do look a fright." I swiftly related my encounter with the Black Stone. He responded by putting his hand into his pocket and producing a familiar black tome. "Scudder's notebook," I grasped. "I had you down as a chump for leaving it in your old jacket pocket, dear boy, but I reckon that little blunder saved your skin." I thanked my new friend profusely, and after he'd lent me the rail fare to Wiltshire, I bade him a sad farewell. Harry's uncle turned out to be a square-jawed fellow who welcomed me into his home as if I were family. I showed him Scudder's notebook and told him of the young man's warning regarding Karolides. It emerged that Scudder had been known to the British Secret Service and was highly regarded. Sir Walter was persuaded some dark business was imminent, but to my surprise, he dismissed Scudder's theory about an assassination as fanciful. "In any case," he added, "Karolides is too well guarded." After a bath, a shave, and a change of clothes, I explained everything that had occurred to me from the death of Scudder to my encounter with the Black Stone. "Being chased right into the very house they'd rented was a stroke of bad luck," said Sir Walter. "I still don't know how the local police got on to me," I said. "After Harry telephoned, I did a bit of research on your adventures," said Sir Walter. "It seems the innkeeper told the police about the car you stole. They found the wreckage and then picked up your trail nearby." "I suppose I'm still a wanted man," I said with a sigh. "Oh, I've sorted all that out with Scotland Yard, dear boy," said Sir Walter with a reassuring smile. We spent the next few hours poring over Scudder's notes, interrupted only when Sir Walter had to leave the room to take a telephone call. When the distinguished man returned, his face was ashen. "It seems I owe our late friend Scudder an apology," he said sadly. "Karolides has been shot dead." That is the end of section 2 of the 39 steps. I'll see you next time to finish our story.